Good morning, Mel. Welcome back.
How's it going?
Pretty good. Pretty good. Nice to chat. How about you?
Yeah, good. I'm enjoying the summer, excited for fall. Fall is really where it's at for me. So I am fine with the warm weather coming to a close. My wardrobe is much better suited to fall anyway.
I feel like that's the case for most, especially us in Canada and Alberta. I walk by my closet and I see these jackets that I've accumulated and I don't wear them for 3 or 4 months and I just feel bummed out about it. It's nice to have a new rotation there for sure.
Yep.
I'm not sure if the feeling's mutual, but
I just like shoes that I can wear with socks, to be honest with you. Like I enjoy a sneaker
Okay.
or a boot much more than I do a sandal, but that's neither here nor there.
Now, I think that's mostly a female thing. I have been told that you're to wear, or my wife tells me I'm to wear loafers without socks, which I think is for psychopaths. But nonetheless, I get it. I think she's wrong, but hopefully she doesn't listen to this. Mel, I'm going to get into a little bit of a market update here. Forgive me if it's a little bit long, but we've had, I think, a pretty monumental shift in markets. We went from having a July that was down, depending on the index you look at, 2 to 3%, which was quite volatile. You had a hedge fund blow up for the most part. The public equity side of that book blew up. That resulted in a massive rally and an acceleration through until today, where we're seeing a little bit of the gains that were realized given back. But this is all in the face of a pretty action-packed Fed calendar on the week, where you have Jackson Hole on Friday, and you're going to get Warsh speak about how serious he actually is in raising interest rates. And the number I want everyone to think about right now is the 30-year Treasury yield, which just hit 5.31 this morning. And we haven't seen capital that expensive or money that with yielding that high since 2007 in the United States. And I mean, I was in high school the last time we had capital yielding over 5.3. Canada's long bond is at levels that we haven't seen since 2010. Same thing in Germany, France, Italy. So everywhere you look right now in the developed world, the cost of borrowing for 30 years is breaking out. And it's happening right at the moment when the biggest companies on earth need to borrow more than any other group of companies has ever needed to borrow in the history of time. Now, you might think or have come to believe that these companies are so rich it doesn't matter and they can fund it themselves. Well, the race has become so intense that is no longer true. And on top of the capex that you'll see on their income statements, these 9 large tech companies have about $3 trillion in commitments over the next number of years that don't necessarily show up on their balance sheet. Now, most of this is tied to AI. But what I want people to understand is that these commitments, these costs, are longer in duration than what might typically be assumed. Like, this is very much, and I think more importantly, if you were listening to the earnings cycle that we just went through, the CEOs talked more about this being the railroad build out than it is the dot-com bust or the mortgage crisis and financial crisis of 2007, 2008. And I think that is an important distinction to make. Ben Thompson was on Invest Like the Best this morning, and Patrick O'Shaughnessy and Ben Thompson are 2 of my favorite people in the world. I listen to absolutely every single one of the pieces of content or read every piece of content that they put out. And what he said, I haven't been able to stop thinking about all morning, really. And he makes this argument he states that everybody has been arguing whether or not we're going to have enough compute and whether or not we're going to have enough electricity. And he actually thinks that the more important question is going to be a lot more simple than that. And are we going to have enough money to build out what we need?
Yep.
And that hasn't been the view of the market for the last 3 years. When everyone, and this, me included, this is a update to our priors and required thinking. We have believed that the bottlenecks to this data center build out, this AI, the AI bottlenecks are electricity, infrastructure, and GPUs, memory, et cetera. And each one of those things have been bottlenecks. But he believes that over the next 5 years, capital is going to be the problem. And when you think about America, money has never been a problem for the better part of the last 15 years. And that has started to ripple through markets. You see it in bonds and in treasuries first, because you always do. And I think that a very interesting progression has been this like slow step down the capital ladder, where you have cash flows from the big tech companies supporting the large majority of the capex and the build out, that has now shifted to off balance sheet equity raises and debt agreements, and has now then evolved into an NVIDIA backed partnership with companies like Apollo, Brookfield, Blackstone, KKR, the largest financial institutions and most sophisticated financial institutions on the planet. And these companies are now tapping the pension markets and long-term capital markets that have largely been left out from exposure to this space. And what this has required is the operators inside of these businesses, being like the private equity companies and the pensions, to sharpen their pencils and kind of get a feel for what exactly it means to invest in a data center. How long are these assets going to actually operate for? What kind of cash are they going to spin off? And in order for them to feel comfortable in underwriting these projects, they need to figure out what the depreciation schedule is going to be, those sorts of things. And what NVIDIA was required to do, I think, is underwrite their technology, their CUDA moat, and give some sort of assurity to these institutions so that they can then put to work the largest capital pools on planet Earth. And it's starting with a $500 billion pool. Now, this $500 billion vehicle to reach into pension funds and insurance floats makes me feel, or it feels very similar to the 1870 railroad for me. And this was mentioned by a number of big tech CEOs this past quarter. So this isn't my idea. But during that period of time, railroads were built out. Almost every single, with the exception of one, railroad company went bankrupt during this period of time, multiple times. And the reason for this was the world literally just ran out of money. And the part that people forget is the trains did keep running. The railroads opened the West effectively and powered the economy for an entire century. We have been benefiting from this infrastructure build out for the last 160, 150 odd years. And this innovation, the transportation and distribution innovation, changed the world completely. But a lot of companies went bankrupt in doing that. Both of these things happened at the same time. So I think that this is really scary for a lot of investors. And I think one thing to consider when viewing this current market while overlaying the old market is the speed at which a return on that invested capital actually shows up. And certainly the rails and the rail cars were running for the last 150 years, but the major returns on those railroads didn't really show up until Warren Buffett started buying them in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, mid 2010s. The actual return on invested capital from this data center build out better show up more than 100 years later, or earlier than 100 years from now. Because if it doesn't, we're in for a world of hurt. Now, you're going to be asking yourself as you listen, is there any revenue being generated here? And I want to share a few numbers with you. Anthropic, which is the leading AI lab currently, they are the company behind Claude and Claude Code. This is the leading lab. It is expected to generate $65 billion in an annual revenue run rate for 2026. They are going to go public in 10 weeks, or they're expected to go public in the next 10 weeks. They believe by the end of this year, they'll be on a $100 billion annual revenue run rate, if not higher, closer to 120, 130. And if that's the case, they believe that will also increase, or there's many investors that believe, the market believes, that they could hit 400 to 500 billion in annual revenue run by the end of 2027. So if they are the largest railroad company, with in addition to OpenAI, they're the largest operator of the train on the proverbial rails.
Yeah.
The revenue generated from this infrastructure is very, very real, and it's already showing up. Now, I want people to think about data centers in two buckets. You have an inference, which is a completely different business to model training. So when you are trying to develop better, improving models at certain times, or at all times, you're effectively doing this. The leading labs are very much it's very much in their interest to be the best model on the market. So they're constantly training and using GPUs to develop the best model that you can use. They need to be at the leading edge so that they can continue to demand the revenue that they do. So a good portion of these data centers and GPUs are being used to train new models. Oftentimes it's the newest, the Vera Rubin, the Blackwell, the B200s, B300s. These are the clusters that they are utilizing to train new models. And that infrastructure is a massive loss leader for them. They can't sell training data, or they can't sell their training runs. They then shift this to inference, and this is when we are utilizing the actual infrastructure itself. This is when these data centers and these companies are serving us the output. Mm-hmm. So when you're prompting your chat model, that is the inference side of the business. Now, I'm not going to get into the tokenomics of all of this because it's quite complex, and each model is different. Each one costs more to prompt and the output. All of those things are unique to individual clusters, individual large language models, and that you're utilizing. But what I wanted people to understand is that distinction. The inference side of the data center is immensely profitable. It is believed that the margins on inference for Anthropic are in the 90s.
Oh, wow.
However, the training side is so incredibly expensive,
yeah,
that they're still barely profitable. So now at some point, this inevitably goes away and all these margins get competed out, or at least it's hoped that they do. And this is where this new entrant or interest from NVIDIA and the hyperscalers comes. So the hyperscalers are Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Meta. These companies have been talking about open source or open weight models. That is counter to, or in competition to, Anthropic and OpenAI with their models that are closed source. And the reason why they're doing this is because they don't want there to be a duopoly of power at hand. Because if they do, when they are serving their infrastructure that they've spent trillions of dollars on building to two customers, the margins are maintained not by them, but by the frontier labs, OpenAI and Anthropic. So what they want to do is create a large competitive arena where they drive down the margins at Anthropic and OpenAI so that they can also run a profitable business. So what NVIDIA is incentivized to do, AMD, Meta, Google, AWS, Amazon, Microsoft, is to have these large open weight, open source infrastructure and model weights so that they can compete with the Anthropics and OpenAIs, so that the margins shift from being at the frontier labs to the large tech companies. And so it's evenly or better distributed. And that, to me, in my opinion, would be much better for the market and better in general to pay for this infrastructure. Now, this is kind of like a long-winded market update, but this quagmire, these data points are what the market is currently jostling with. And where the margin ends up being realized is unknown currently and is reasonably distributed currently. It's largely being earned by NVIDIA because they still maintain 70-75% margins on their GPUs, and they are very much incentivized to maintain that. And then you have your leading labs, frontier labs, that are demanding an enormous amount of the consumer front most folks are using those models here in North America. The market itself, if we don't move heavier to open weights, very well could struggle, because all the pricing power that they currently hold could very well shift and stay at the leading labs. But it seems as though very recently you have Kimi K3, you have all of these Muse Spark with Meta, these very, very competitive open weight models that are coming in and being showing to be very, very good, and to the point in which we as consumers actually need or can tell do what we want them to do. And they're roughly 3 to 6 months behind the leading labs. That is a healthy market to be in. And you actually have seen a significant rally in the picks and shovels, so to speak, as a result of this. And that has been currently how the market has played out over the last 2 weeks to 4 weeks. And so, Mel, I've kind of worked through these dynamics and how people are thinking inside the tech market and the infrastructure market. This then starts to funnel out to the interest rate issue that we're starting to run up against. And you have, like I mentioned at the beginning, you have Jackson Hole and a Fed meeting where they're going to discuss interest rate policy. We have a trade issue that we're jostling with regards to Mark Carney, Donald Trump, and Kuzma. We have very expensive debt markets in Canada and the United States. This is all kind of coming to a head, and we need to deal with it intelligently and within the framework of how the market is currently dealing out these new waves of technology. So now we've got on the docket today kind of a host or rather a list of things that I want to chat through, but most of them I want to lead towards the political side of things. Now, we have, as I've mentioned, the Kuzma negotiation. We have the Fed meetings, and then we have, I think, anyways, some important conversations around scarcity and luxury that I want to have at the very end. But Mel, what are you seeing on the political front? I think that it's about to become very busy for you after what I would guess to be a fairly dry 2 or 3 weeks. Explain to me what you're seeing in your world.
Yeah, so that was a great summary of everything that is going on from the market's perspective. And it's kind of interesting because everything that you're talking about, while it sounds very technical and very removed from politics, it's really not. And I think that what I've tried to do over the past couple of years, when markets and politics and economics and all of these things have seemingly changed every single day, it seems like you can open the news and every day there's a fundamentally different thing going on, and it can be really easy to get lost in the particulars of what is happening. And so one of the things I really do try and focus on from the politics and economics and policy side is what are the trends that we are seeing from the market, from political decisions, from the economy. And so I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that I have mentioned before on this podcast and continue to feel and see as being true. And the first comes as a result of some of the trade discussions that you're raising. So we're recording this episode on August 18th, and we know that there's a sort of deadline on August 19th when it comes to the new threat of 50% tariffs that the US has said that they're going to place on Canadian goods, which does include, if a new deal is not found, a lot of goods that were previously covered under Kuzma. So that tariff threat continues to be ever present and there. We also are seeing not necessarily huge economic growth in Canada as a result of that. So I think the first theme that I think is really ringing true is that Canada does not have the leverage that it thinks it does in the Kuzma debates. Regardless of whether or not you agree or disagree with how Trump is handling things, it is high time that voters as well as politicians realize the limits of our ability to beat our chest and retaliate, because one of the things that we've talked about as it relates to Mark Carney since last year when he became prime minister is his desire to, align a little bit more with Europe, closer relationships with China, all these types of things. to sort of combat or counter the uncertainty that's coming as a result of Trump's presidency and the unpredictability, to be sure, of how he speaks about CUSMA and other important issues with Canada. I think that what I'm seeing is that the longer Canada waits to admit that it does not dictate terms to the United States, the quicker we can get to a place where the rest of our policymaking aligns in a way that is palatable to the United States, so that we're not, shooting ourselves in the foot when it comes to this protracted conversation about tariffs. Because another theme that I see is that we are not going to return to the certainty of CUSMA that we were used to previously. We need to get used to the fact that we are now playing in an arena where long-term sustainability as this global world order shifts, that's not the game that we're playing anymore. And right now it seems like Canada is coming prepared, like with a racket, when really we need a hockey stick. We're playing a totally different game. So that's another thing that has sort of rung true for me as well, is like, how many times for political purposes are we going to allow our federal government, and to a certain extent some of our provincial governments, to pretend that Canada is in a situation that it is just not in? And the reality is that we need the United States. We do not have the power to say, middle fingers up or elbows up to them. And the quicker we get to the point where we can stop causing problems, the more we can start focusing on our own economy, which, by the way, isn't growing or, thriving in the way that Carney, I think, promised in many ways. We have everything from like jobs numbers to sort of our projected growth. Let's
talk about that a little bit now.
Yeah.
Because Trevor Tombe had a really good report, and I think a good article rather in the Hub, that I think was misinterpreted by a number of people.
Yeah.
And the reason why I know that it was misinterpreted by a number of people is because I received a lot of folks that would generally lean fairly left that listen to this podcast, sending me this article that says the jobs created by the Canadian economy, and then also the tweet that was put out by Mark Carney as some sort of gotcha, we're doing so good. And then if you read the article, you're like, What are you talking about? Did you not read it? Because if you
primary source data, like if you look at the labor survey from July 2026, like, yes, employment increased, but like literally within the margin of error, which means that it could have gone up that much or down that much, right? Like it's not as it seems. And I think that this is something that I tell my clients and people that I work with all the time. Now more than ever, it is really important to be looking at primary source data versus the interpretation of that data on social media or through news releases. Like, you need to go to the source and actually read the thing, because yes, an increase is an increase, but it's not a magnitude of increase or in the sort of areas that I think are going to provide long-term growth. So I completely agree with you. I think that
like a quote from the article is like, a better way to think about this is Canada is gradually returning to normal rates of growth, but along a permanently lower path. And measured against our peers or even against our own potential, recent performance looks anything but strong. It's not I think it's to OECD countries or at least like our peers, so to speak, had grown at roughly 1.7%, while we contracted 0.1%. That is obviously a good reason, or that those economic results are a big reason why Justin Trudeau had to resign, and we had that election a few years ago. A shift back to economic growth is obviously a positive. However, I've long said this on this podcast that we've been doing for well over 6 years, that economic outperformance is relative. Currency is all relative.
Yeah.
Our performance
inflation
versus our peers versus other economies has been abysmal and continues to be abysmal. And that is shocking given the opportunity that the world currently presents us. We have very accommodative commodity pricing at the moment, and yet we are still trailing the rest of the world. That is concerning. So yes, while this headline sounds good, don't share it in the belief that this is a positive or some form of congratulations, because the work to be done is still incredible. Is honestly, at the rate in which we're seeing inflation return or inflation expectations return, we are not outstripping the 30-year at the moment. That is a very big problem. And if you look at the way in which we've treated the economic superpower below us, you have Mexico that is very heavily exposed to US trade, outgrew us. The European Union, that hasn't grown ever, outperformed us. The UK, which has had its own difficult run because it has not had a relationship with, or a good relationship with, the EU since Brexit, is outperforming us. We need to get our crap together.
Yeah, and I think that any good politician and any person who's looking at the impact that this is going to have on markets, it's actually not necessary to debate whether or not Canada is growing at a slower rate and a stagnated rate as compared with other countries. Like, that's just there in fact. The thing that we need to sort of encourage elected officials to look at, and we need to consider when we are looking at how this is going to impact the market, is why is that happening? Right? And like the underlying reasons for why Canada's growth is slow. And I think that there's a lot of reasons for that. I think that one of the main ones right now is how the government has pulled back a little bit on immigration. So our population is not growing as quickly. And because such a significant portion of our GDP growth is from housing, you are seeing a little bit of cooling off when it comes to demand for housing, because there's just not as many people at the same rate that we saw during that COVID period. And so that's one of the reasons. Another one of the reasons, which we can get into talking about, is the fact that we see a lot of people who are building successful companies that were educated in Canada, that are from Canada, that are going elsewhere because Canada is not presumably sending the signals that it is a place that you would want to be if you're going to build a massive company. And that is a common thing that we see, and not even just in the sort of tech space either. Like you're increasingly seeing this, in Calgary, where I am. I see this anecdotally as well in the energy space as well. And there has long been this assumption that, like, where are the energy companies going to go? That's not what I'm observing, even though oil prices are really high right now. So there's just a lot to think about in terms of what Canada is offering. And you see this, like, I don't know if you want to get into talking about how some of these numbers about, Canadians leaving the US.
I would love to.
Yeah, but like you see, there's this
the conveyor belt out of the country.
Yes. So you see like two things happening in politics. There is this sort of way of describing what's going on during a campaign is like an air war and like a ground war. So the air war would be like, what's the media saying? What's the like top line sort of polling saying? And then the ground war is more so like when you knock on a door, what are people saying at the individual sort of household voter level, what's going on? And I see that there's like a dissonance that's happening in Canada between the air war and ground war economically. Like the air war is very much a story being told by the Liberals and sort of the established players in our economy that things are great. Growth is looking amazing. Everything's, on the up and up. Carney is much better than Trudeau. Relatively speaking, again, that may be true. But what's actually happening at that sort of granular level, and the reality is that we're seeing significant people, which we can link this article so that people can kind of look at the sort of exact numbers, but people are being educated in Canada. So we have the human capital that's able to create this massive and amazing wealth that is leaving Canada to go build things in the United States. And so if you were just paying attention to the air war, you'd think that all Canadians hate the US. We don't want to be having anything to do with them. Canada's great, our amazing healthcare system, our amazing education system. So then why are people who are creating wealth leaving for the United States right now at alarming numbers? And we're not seeing the same thing happen in reverse. And I think that the reason why is because we now have this opportunity with AI and so many other technologies to actually build stuff. And we have smart people here that have gone through amazing post-secondaries, had a great quality of living. Inequality is not sort of the same as we see in other parts of the world. And so basically what we're seeing is Canada, from my perspective, is a farm team for the US economy. And we're not having that conversation.
We have this, and here's my view of this, Mel, and I'm sorry to cut you off, because this has been a bone of mine to pick for a number of years now. The top 1% of our population leaves, and it's because we treat them as though they are our enemy in many cases. But I think it's also like it's a two-pronged attack, and it's the United States has built, in this article he defines it as a conveyor belt of on its way out of Canada, or it takes our talent, brings it to the United States via a conveyor belt of accelerators. And these accelerators are programs. So you have like the Teal Fellowship, the 1517 fund that takes high school and pre-college kids and entrepreneurs and funds their idea. And then you have the Neo Scholars and the Paradorm and the Emergent Ventures and YC's Apply and Defer accelerator that takes kids that are in college and funds their ideas and gives them like frat houses to build companies in. And then you have the new grad group, or the pre-idea 0 to 1, which is Founders Fund, the Residency, the SPC Fellowship. And this then is another rung on the ladder that takes them up and out and accelerates their business ideas and their entrepreneurships and gives them mentorship, capital, employees, and supports them. Then you have the Y Combinators, the A16, Z speed runs. And these are each rungs and lengths of this conveyor belt, quote unquote, that takes a talented kid from Waterloo or the University of Alberta, University of Calgary, UBC, brings them into the United States, gives them capital and ideas and mentorship, and accelerates their ideas, because the belief in the United States is that entrepreneurship is the basis of the success of their country, that they believe in supporting the talented and the hungry, and rather than labeling them as greedy and money and abusive and negative sum and or like terrorizing of the general population. And so I think it's not just obviously the way in which we view or have culturally shunned this top 1% group of folks. I think it's also the depth of their capital markets, which we just have effectively left to and I think this is largely just a feedback loop, sadly, but we have pensions, we have in governments, and that's the depth of our capital and our banks, our six big banks.
And it's important to understand that when we talk about the depth of capital markets, we're not talking about some like esoteric institutional thing. The reason why the United States has depth in capital markets is because it allows people to become 100 millionaires, billionaires, trillionaires. And I get literally roasted and blasted every single time I say like trickle down impacts. But the reality is that if you have that much money, you are invested in that money getting bigger and have the ability to see other people do well as well. And I think that this is part of the problem with Canada's tall poppy syndrome, is that like we have this lack mentality when it comes to succeeding, so that there's this mentality of like there can only be a few successful people, and that somebody else's success is going to somehow take away from mine because we don't have the limitless opportunities and abundance. And I think that is another huge reason as well. I am not at the caliber of person that they would be talking about in these studies. But if I were, I imagine I would want to go somewhere where I was told the sky's the limit and I was encouraged to succeed. And that I think is way different in the States. And there's more of a population, but there's just also more of a culture of like, let's build things, let's fail, but let's actually make that growth be part of the private sector. And we've talked about this before. There is way less unionization sort of component to the workforce in the US than there is in Canada. And frankly, it's easier to have a government job or a union job than it is to work for 15 or 20 years as an entrepreneur to hopefully eventually hit it big. And so culturally, it's discouraged as well.
Yeah, I view it this way. We are training and raising these people. And I think this is the beauty of Canada. Like we do a great job of taking care of the middle. And I think that is the best part of our country. There's no place on earth, I think, that is better to be average than it is in Canada. But we also need to take care of the top 5%. And those are the ones that are, sadly, the ones that pay for absolutely everything. And we would do best or better to reward those folks and incentivize them to continue to build here in Canada. We need to not just train and build amazing entrepreneurs, because we are doing that. It is very clear. As this article points out, there was 517 US-based companies with a Canadian founder that have together raised $414 billion.
Yep.
56 of which are worth more than $1 billion each. And
so people are aware that's almost the size of the entire federal budget in Canada.
Yeah. So these companies are being funded in the United States. They are capturing the value here, not us. When they leave to start their businesses in the United States, we have paid the 25-year cost of building an amazing entrepreneur to then lose them in a draft to the United States where they pay all of their taxes. And that is I think, an indictment of our structure from a tax base perspective and a culture. And we need to change that badly. Because if we want to have big, beautiful, great infrastructure, and if the middle distribution of our population wants to continue to see an improving standard of living, we need these folks. And we need to make them feel comfortable and supported here so that they stay, similarly to how the older generations did. Because I believe that during the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, that wasn't the case. We didn't see that conveyor belt. But over the last 30 years, the conveyor belt has been built in the United States out of a lot of countries, Europe, Canada, India, into their country because they want the top 1%. We don't. And we have not messaged. If we do, we have not been saying, we have not crafted that message well. So this is, I think, should be on the top of the minds of our politicians in recrafting that message and telling that story. It's really difficult to do, though, when there's a party that villainizes them at every single whenever they can.
Yeah. And I think that I would just say that it's been my experience, like not even just on this topic, but with anything, it's quite difficult to dislike somebody that you actually get the chance to know, or that you actually get the chance to understand, like even if you have different perspectives. And so I would say that, like, you know, I'm not going to go so far as to say that bring out the violins for multi-million and billionaires in Canada. But I think a good start would be just get off their necks and see where that goes, because the numbers don't lie. And it's not going to become cheaper to run things in Canada. We talked earlier about how interest rates are trending and the cost of borrowing. Like, if we are going to build Canada, we are going to need to find another source of money rather than government money, which is taxpayer dollars, because every year that you drive people who are contributing in tax dollars out, you are forced to raise taxes on people who can, you know, are going to have there's going to be more adverse impact on having high taxes as the middle class. And then you combine inflation in there. Like, from my perspective, and I'm not anti-Canada, I love this country, but we are on a fast track to being like a complete vassal state. And we are asleep at the wheel, and we are making relationships and friendships with other countries that are not in alignment with what the values of this country are. And we are turning our heads and our backs to countries that, while imperfect, at least share a lot of what the sort of Canadian dream and vision is. And I think that all of this is happening in a way where we're not going to fully notice until it's too late. And then we're talking about a fundamentally different calculus there. So I think if you do love Canada and you do want to see this country do well, that it is actually an act of great love for your country to suggest that the people who are doing well do what we can to attract them and keep them here, because I think that is good for everybody, and other people's success does not deter from your ability to be successful. This is at an economic level, but also at an individual level. And I think that's something that we need to really remember as we talk all this elbows up and anti-US and all of this. It's like, it's actually quite a privilege to be able to walk around with your elbows up, because that tells me that you're in a position where you are post-economic, and the growth that's available for this country in the next 10, 20, 30 years, you could take it or leave it. And so I congratulate you for being in that position. But let's also think about the other people that are just trying to get a piece of that as well.
They're trying to build. And this brings up another one of the articles that was posted, and a lot of folks don't particularly agree with the Fraser Institute, but recently I think August 13th, they released a quick study or a review of taxes versus the necessities of life. And the average Canadian family spent or spends 42% of their income on taxes, more than on housing, food, and clothing combined. And when you compare that to the 1960s, the taxes have grown more rapidly than any other single expenditure for the average Canadian family. Expenditures on shelter increased by 2,349%, food 952%, clothing 526% from 1961 to 2025. The increase in the tax bill was 2,928%. And so when you consider these numbers, it explains one thing for me specifically. It's that certainly we've seen inflation, but the efficiency of deliverables from a government perspective has gotten considerably more out of hand than even groceries have.
And the services have deteriorated as well. Like, this is the thing. It's not as though we're paying more and getting better quality, but services that are procured or that are delivered by the provincial level, the municipal level, and the federal level. Like, I have noticed a precipitous drop in services. I'm currently trying to contact a government agency about something, and it's a 3 to 4 day event to actually talk to somebody about something. But as I noticed anecdotally as well, if you are calling to pay taxes, you'll get a pickup on the first ring. So I think there needs to be a little bit more equity in terms of what Canadians feel like they're getting for their services, because it's not a badge of honor to pay like 50% in taxes and have terrible services. Like, I'm comfortable paying taxes, but we need to be seeing the quality in services as well. And we need to see wages increase. And you know how wages increase? When there's actual economic growth that's created out of innovative companies. Probably a lot of the people that have left Canada to the US are running companies that are paying pretty good wages. And so it'd be nice if those were being paid here.
Couldn't agree more, Mel. But I would add, and this is kind of in defense of government services, I believe that and this actually is going to bring me back to AI a little bit. I believe that our expectation of service delivered has gone on a form of hedonic treadmill of sorts. And this is that today, when you engage with your AI model, you just expect it to be great. 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, you were blown away when you could render an AI image. You put your picture into an AI generated image generator, and it would make a kind of like a caricature of yourself. And you're like, holy crap, have you guys seen this? There's apps that were going viral because of that. And then fast forward 6 months, and we had ChatGPT 3 or GPT-3, and it was delivering us answers to questions in an app rather than via search. And you're just like, whoa, look at this thing. Yeah. If you were to go back today and use a GPT-3 model or even a GPT-4 model, you'd be like, this thing's dumb. AI sucks. And it's just the way in which we constantly forget the technological innovation and our standard of living improving without even really realizing it. This is what technology does to us. It's the exponential growth and improvement of things that we don't even recognize anymore. And so you bring that back to services. I think when we view the 4 days to deal with a single issue, 35 years ago, that was the case as well. So what hasn't happened is it hasn't kept up with our expectations and how they have improved or how they have changed. And I think that that is an important distinction to make, because we need to integrate technology more into our deliverables on the government side. And we have not done a good job of doing that. So that is an important item. However, I do think it's important to recognize when our expectations are outpacing perhaps what is possible. And I just wanted to kind of bring that up. Now, where we're at technologically has started to bring up a few problems that I'm recognizing, more so just on my Instagram feed, Mel. So over the last little while, I've been kind of grappling with this idea of a life in which we believe to be this aesthetic that we're aspiring to have. Every room in the house has to be perfectly organized, or it has to be Instagram worthy. We need to have, we've gotten to a certain level of standard of living, at least. I mean, maybe this is my privilege speaking a bit, but we want to have this perfectly organized life, a sequence to things, an organization that I don't think was an expectation of the past. And what has happened is that what used to be cool, or what used to signal wealth or exclusivity, is changing. We've talked about this with regards to BMI and weight, and how being skinny used to signal you took care of yourself, and now that signal has eroded a little bit with Ozempic. I think that is also occurring with the availability of luxury goods.
Yeah,
and so I think that as this changes and evolves, and what social media has delivered, the world is going to become a different place where everybody has rooms in their house, or a lifestyle that is perfectly curated. And we're going to have a shift back to a more dysfunctional, more random signal that actually shows that you're in some way in the elite class. And I want to flesh this out a little bit further, but to be organized, and to dress really well, or to have this perfect aesthetic in your home, is kind of like a baseline and no longer interesting. You need to have things that are a little bit beat up, reused. You need to refinish your shoes instead of buying brand new ones. A new way of signaling these things is going to impact, I think, the consumer economy a little bit. And I could see over the next 5 years a pullback from consumption or overconsumption, and into, obviously, thrifting has gotten huge, but it's a continuation of this throughout not just clothing, but furniture, through everything in life, and how you treat the items that are sacred to you, and how you purchase those things will be a new way of signaling things. And I also believe that a lack of posting about what you're doing, how you're traveling, what you're wearing, how what you drive, is going to be a lot more of a social signal than actually posting it itself. And I think this is, again, kind of an extension to what we talked about last episode with not allowing influencers into your store. And this is what I'm starting to notice anyways. I'm not sure if it's the same for you.
I completely agree. I think status is often attributed with what's unique or scarce or hard to have. And as you were speaking, because I've been thinking about this a lot too, I've just been thinking about the things that I think are going to be status goods moving forward, like having muscles that you had to work for, in addition to having a good physique. I would say overall vitality, do you have healthy skin? Are your eyes clear? Do you look like you're rested, and have had the opportunity to take care of yourself in that way? Because that really can't be faked. I think we're also going to move away from fake aesthetic things. You definitely see a sort of drawback of Botox fillers, other cosmetic surgeries that people are sort of going back on. The ability to sit still for an hour and read a book is, I think, going to be a status good. And then I also think having a family is a status good, because so many people are choosing to like delay that or not have that. And I think that like if you are in a loving relationship with a family, obviously there are people who have challenges with that, and I get that, but that is going to be the thing that I think separates people, because that you cannot actually fake raising a child or having a relationship for, 10 plus years. Congrats to you and Adriana. And I think that is actually going to be the new status good, because anybody can buy something on credit and pretend like they're good at it. And I also think not having a job is going to be a new status good. People who have accumulated wealth in such a way where they don't have to work is like, and ipso facto can do whatever they want with their time. Not that they're not working, but that's going to be a new status.
It is quite the privilege, that's for sure. And I'm never going to be able to signal such a thing. The additional thing I wanted to bring up to you, and I want to get your take on this. Me and Adriana started watching Cape Fear on Apple, and it was fantastic. It is a remake of an old movie or an old TV show, and it's produced by Martin Scorsese, and it has, and I'm going to butcher his name, but Javier Bardem and Amy Adams in it. And I thought Adriana made a comment that I thought was interesting, where she said that I love the way Amy Adams looks in this show. She looks so real. Mm-hmm. She doesn't look like she's had any work done. And I think she's just so beautiful. And I felt that to be an interesting change in the way in which women are treating their bodies now. We were not 6 months ago watching a movie with Nicole Kidman in it, and she was just like, man, nothing in her face moves. And then you contrast that with Amy Adams in this movie, and I think they're fairly similar in age. Amy Adams is 51, I believe, and Nicole Kidman, I'm going to look it up right now, is 59. Okay. Well, I just thought that statement meant something, and it was interesting to me. Now, commentary on the show, amazing. Best TV show I've seen in probably a year. Highly recommend watching it. But I do feel as though that this is kind of a continued extension to how the world is changing. And
just to comment further on that, the reason why I would assume Adriana thought that is because it is unique these days to be willing to be unique, that signals like confidence, that signals self-assuredness, none of which, a credit card or an AI model can buy for you. Like that is work that you have had to do to get to a point where you're like, you know what? I don't love this about my face, but I'm going to leave it that way. For girls, at least, I think that's like a huge shift. And I think that it is going to become more visible.
Mm-hmm. It's just, I find it important to follow the consumer trend, mostly because it really impacts earnings in consumables. Like Lululemon is an example, Nike is an example. When you start to see large entrants into their markets, their stocks tend to underperform. If you pay attention to movie star trends and what women are noticing in other women, it tends to lead to similar performance in the underlying companies that service these things. And so you can really get a great signal from culture. And because movies still are an enormous part of our culture, that is how the United States exports their world. The reason why capitalism and the American dream exists beyond their borders is Hollywood and Instagram in today's day and age, and YouTube. And the way that they export their interests and their morals and their what's important to them is via this media influence. And so it then percolates or rather it kind of distillates into our culture via these films and these short form videos and these people, these influencers. And if you think about how this is going to then impact the Botox market, you can kind of see a trend here. I'm not saying that it will be devastating, but it very well could see less volume, right? And just women doing less or different procedures or things that are a little bit more subtle. And I just find that to be important data point to be watching. So Mel, I don't have a lot more to bring up today. I appreciate your time. I believe we'll probably chat in 2 weeks. Maybe we'll even do it in person.
Yeah, we probably could do it in person at the lake.
Yeah.
Annoy both of our families, but that's okay.
All right. Well, Mel, thanks for your time.
Take care, Joel.
That's the show. If it made you think, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And hit follow so you don't miss the next one. New episodes every 2 weeks. Until then, keep learning, keep earning, and keep investing. See you next time.